Richard Wolcott Carson, known more intimately as Rick, entered the world in 1952, the youngest of 3 sons born to Johnny Carson. At this point, his father was already a burgeoning television personality, steadily climbing the ladder of fame. Little did anyone know that within a decade, Johnny Carson's face and voice would become utterly synonymous with American late-night television, making him a household name and a nightly fixture in millions of homes. For over 3 monumental decades, from 1962 to 1992, Johnny Carson reigned supreme as the host of NBC's The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, transcending mere entertainment to become an undeniable cultural institution, a trusted friend, and a cherished ritual for an entire nation. On screen, he was a revelation, quick-witted, effortlessly charming, disarmingly cool, and an unparalleled master of the opening monologue, the art of the interview, and the delicate dance of comedic timing. Before we get started, please consider liking and subscribing. Your support is greatly appreciated. Yet, behind the iconic desk, the perpetual smile, and the polished, accessible persona, Johnny Carson was a famously private, even reclusive individual. This profound, almost paradoxical dichotomy between his public warmth and his deeply guarded personal reserve would profoundly shape every aspect of his life, but perhaps none more acutely and complexly than his relationships with his own children, and particularly with Rick. Growing up as the son of America's comedic king and a cultural titan meant Rick's childhood was anything but ordinary. While the fathers of other children departed daily for conventional offices or bustling factories, Rick's dad seemingly vanished into the luminous glow of the television screen each night, engaging in captivating conversations with Hollywood's elite, exchanging witty banter with comedians, and effortlessly entertaining an entire nation, all from a distance. This created a unique, often disorienting, and profoundly challenging environment for a young boy. The Carson family lived with the constant, almost palpable hum of their father's immense fame, the hushed whispers of recognition in public spaces, the sudden flashes of paparazzi cameras, and the sheer inescapable omnipresence of The Tonight Show in every American home. Even within the supposedly private confines of their homes, the colossal shadow of Johnny Carson, the untouchable celebrity, loomed impossibly large. This pervasive, almost suffocating fame meant that Rick and his brothers, Corey and Chris, lived under a peculiar form of fame by proxy, where their own burgeoning identities were inextricably linked to and often perceived solely through the distorting lens of their famous father's public image. Their lives were undoubtedly marked by significant material comfort and privilege, but beneath the surface there was perhaps also a subtle, nagging sense of being perpetually observed, judged, and defined. Even when they were not directly in the blinding spotlight themselves, this inherent lack of privacy, even in ostensibly private moments, was a constant, unspoken burden. Accounts from those intimately close to the Carson family, including Johnny's longtime producer Fred DeCordova and various biographers, alongside later poignant reflections from Rick himself and his surviving brother Corey, consistently painted a picture of Johnny as an emotionally distant figure. His intellectual brilliance and professional focus were overwhelmingly directed towards his career, which demanded immense, almost monastic dedication and an unwavering commitment to its craft. Johnny's true comfort zone, his true arena of self-expression, was almost exclusively the stage, or the carefully constructed set of The Tonight Show, rather than the messy, unpredictable realm of intimate personal interactions. He was famously known for his quiet, often melancholic demeanor off-camera, a stark and often unsettling contrast to the gregarious, effervescent, and seemingly open persona he projected nightly to millions. This fundamental aspect of his personality meant that genuine, deep emotional connection and vulnerability with his sons were often elusive, replaced instead by a formal politeness or a detached observation. Rick, more than his brothers perhaps, seemed to harbor a deep, unfulfilled yearning for his father's attention, his overt approval, and his personal validation. A universal desire for any child, but one magnified exponentially and made heartbreakingly difficult when your father is adored by tens of millions nightly, yet seems reserved, even remote, with you in person. This pronounced emotional distance wasn't necessarily born of malice, coldness, or a lack of love, but rather emerged from a complex interplay of Johnny's own deeply ingrained reserved nature, his relentless and all-consuming work schedule, and perhaps a generational difficulty in openly expressing profound emotions and vulnerabilities. Family dinners, if they managed to happen at all amidst Johnny's demanding schedule, might have been polite and orderly, but often lacked the genuine warmth, spontaneous laughter, and deep conversational flow that fosters true familial bonds. Conversations between father and sons might have remained largely superficial, anchored in practicalities or light banter, devoid of the profound emotional connection and shared intimacy that Rick perhaps so desperately craved. This limited, often transactional interaction meant that Rick frequently articulated a profound feeling that he barely knew the true man behind the larger-than-life legend. He saw the charismatic host, the witty conversationalist, the master of ceremonies, but struggled, often painfully, to find the emotionally engaged, deeply present father figure he longed for. This created a pervasive sense of yearning, a quiet frustration, and a simmering resentment that would subtly yet profoundly fester and deepen over the years, eroding the foundation of their relationship. Further complicating this dynamic were Johnny Carson's multiple marriages and divorces, 4 in total. Each dissolution of a marriage brought with it a new stepmother and a shifting familial landscape, adding layers of instability and emotional upheaval for the children. While the specifics of how each divorce directly impacted Rick are largely private, a child's sense of security and belonging can be deeply shaken by such events, especially when the family patriarch is so globally visible. These marital changes likely contributed to an already fragmented family life, making it even harder for Rick to forge a consistent, stable relationship with his father, who was often consumed by his personal transitions as much as his professional demands. The public nature of these events also meant that the family's private turmoil was often played out, however subtly, in the public sphere, adding another layer of pressure. The Carson boys were, in many significant ways, left to navigate the intricate complexities of their upbringing somewhat independently. While they undoubtedly benefited from their father's extraordinary success, enjoying material comforts and unique opportunities, they also bore the distinct and heavy burden of being his offspring. There were unspoken expectations, perceived societal standards they were expected to meet, yet they often lacked the consistent emotional guidance and steady presence that a more engaged, accessible parent might typically provide. This early emotional landscape, profoundly marked by their father's overwhelming public presence, his equally overwhelming private absence, and the constant, subtle pressures of inherited fame, would irrevocably set the stage for the deep-seated resentments, the unaddressed grievances, and the lingering feelings of unforgiveness that Rick would carry throughout his life. These sentiments would profoundly shape the trajectory of his own personal journey, influencing his choices, his struggles, and his enduringly complicated relationship with the iconic figure who was, at once, his legendary dad and his emotionally distant parent. As Rick Carson transitioned from childhood into his turbulent adolescence and early adulthood, the vast chasm between his father's public persona and his private demeanor began to exert an increasingly profound influence on his own life. While Johnny Carson commanded the admiration of millions, Rick grappled with the often isolating reality of his home life, where emotional expression was sparse and deep connections seemed elusive. This stark contrast fostered a growing sense of frustration and, ultimately, a widening emotional rift between father and son. Rick wasn't seeking his father's fame, but rather his affirmation, his attention, and a genuine personal bond that felt consistently out of reach. Rick, like many children of highly successful parents, faced the immense pressure of forging his own identity and career path outside the colossal shadow of his father. He gravitated towards creative pursuits, particularly photography and music, fields that offered a sense of personal expression and individuality. He enrolled in art schools, pursuing his passion with earnestness. Yet these aspirations often seemed to exist in a different orbit than his father's world. While Johnny was the undisputed king of late night, a master of mainstream entertainment, Rick's artistic endeavors were often more niche, reflecting a different sensibility. It's plausible that Rick yearned for his father's genuine interest or even a public endorsement of his work. But such overt displays of paternal support were rare, if not entirely absent, from Johnny's reserved nature. This perceived lack of recognition, whether intentional or simply a byproduct of Johnny's personality, could have been a deeply felt disappointment for Rick, contributing to a sense of being perpetually overlooked by the one person whose approval he most desired. Several instances, both public and private, contributed to the growing emotional chasm between Johnny and Rick. Johnny Carson was known for his incredible discipline and focus on his craft. His life revolved around The Tonight Show. This intense dedication, while admirable professionally, often came at the expense of his personal relationships. Stories from those who knew Johnny well often recounted his preference for solitary activities or the company of a very select few close friends, rather than large family gatherings or intimate conversations. For Rick, this might have translated into a feeling of secondary importance, as if his father's professional world always took precedence over his personal one. There were no grand public gestures of father-son bonding, no shared hobbies that drew them closer in the public eye. Instead, the narrative that emerged was one of a distant, albeit financially supportive patriarch. Furthermore, Johnny's private life, marked by 4 marriages and multiple divorces, undoubtedly added layers of complexity and instability to the sons' lives. Each marital dissolution brought a new set of dynamics, potentially new stepmothers, and further fragmented the concept of a stable family unit. For Rick, who was already struggling to connect with an elusive father, these shifts could have exacerbated feelings of displacement or emotional insecurity. The privacy Johnny so fiercely guarded meant that the emotional toll of these changes on his children was rarely discussed publicly, leaving much to speculation, but undoubtedly impacting their sense of belonging and their relationship with their father. The media, while respecting Johnny's private nature to an extent, still observed these changes, and the lack of overt warmth within the family was a quietly noted characteristic. Rick, in his personal life, faced his own significant struggles, which, in retrospect, could be viewed as a cry for the very connection and validation he lacked. He had a tumultuous personal life at times, including a reported battle with substance abuse, a common coping mechanism for individuals grappling with deep-seated emotional pain or feelings of inadequacy. While Johnny Carson provided financial support, it's unclear to what extent he provided emotional intervention, or guidance for Rick's personal challenges. For Rick, this lack of direct, empathetic involvement from his father in his moments of vulnerability might have been particularly painful. It can be argued that a child, even an adult child, yearns for their parents' emotional presence during difficult times, and if that presence was consistently absent, it could lead to deep-seated feelings of unforgiveness. Not necessarily forgiveness for a malicious act, but for a perceived emotional abandonment, a failure to truly see and connect with him on a deeper level. In a poignant interview, Rick once articulated his desire for a more conventional relationship with his father, expressing a longing for shared experiences beyond the superficiality that characterized their interactions. He often spoke about his father's comedic genius with admiration, but beneath that admiration lay an unspoken sadness about the personal gap between them. This growing realization of what was missing, combined with Rick's own personal struggles and perceived lack of paternal emotional investment, solidified the unforgivable aspects of their relationship. It wasn't a single dramatic betrayal, but rather the cumulative weight of unfulfilled emotional needs, a consistent pattern of distance, and the inherent loneliness of being the son of a beloved national figure who remained emotionally elusive behind the scenes. This emotional void, perpetually overshadowed by Johnny's public adoration, created a silent but profound burden for Rick, shaping his perspective on life and his enduring, complex relationship with his legendary father. The already intricate and emotionally charged relationship between Johnny Carson and his son, Rick, was tragically and irrevocably altered by a devastating event that would cast an enduring, somber shadow over both their lives, and indeed, over the broader narrative of Johnny's personal story. On June 21st, 1991, a date etched in the annals of Carson family history, just as Johnny Carson was nearing the triumphant culmination of his monumental, nearly 30-year reign on NBC's The Tonight Show, Rick Carson, then a vibrant 39-year-old, was tragically killed in a horrific single-vehicle car accident. The precise circumstances were chilling. He was driving his Land Rover on a rugged dirt road in the remote hills of San Luis Obispo County, California, engaged in his passion for photography, when the vehicle plunged violently over a steep embankment. The news of this sudden and shocking loss rippled with profound sadness and disbelief, not only through the immediate Carson family, but also across the hearts of millions of Americans who felt an almost personal connection to Johnny, having invited him into their homes nightly for decades. For Johnny, this was an unimaginable, gut-wrenching blow, made perhaps even more acutely painful and poignant by the known, albeit fiercely private, emotional distance that had regrettably existed between him and his youngest son. The dream of a future reconciliation, or even a simple deepening of their bond, was cruelly snatched away. Rick's untimely and brutal death forced an unavoidable, public, and deeply personal reckoning for Johnny Carson. The very next night, defying his almost unbreakable rule of maintaining an impenetrable wall between his fiercely guarded private life and his meticulously crafted public persona, Johnny Carson delivered one of the most moving, vulnerable, and uncharacteristically personal monologues of his entire illustrious career. Stepping out from behind the veil of his usual comedic detachment, he openly, bravely, and with raw honesty spoke of his profound grief to a captivated national audience. He eulogized Rick not as a son of, but as an individual of remarkable talent, specifically highlighting his passion and skill as a photographer. In a rare and touching display, Johnny shared several of his son's exquisite landscape photographs on screen, allowing millions to glimpse the artistic soul of the son he had lost. He reflected on the immense joy Rick had brought into his life and the deep, aching sorrow of his sudden passing. This moment was truly extraordinary because it was so utterly unlike the private, guarded, and emotionally reserved Johnny Carson the public had come to know. It was a searing, unfiltered glimpse into the very human pain of a father who, despite his legendary emotional reserves and his lifelong struggle with intimacy, was clearly and unequivocally devastated by the irreplaceable loss of his child. For many viewers, it was the first time they truly saw the flesh and blood man behind the legendary entertainer, openly grappling with a very raw, very public, yet deeply personal grief. It was an acknowledgement, if not of closeness, then certainly of profound connection and love. However, even within this poignant public display of a father's sorrow, the pervasive undertones of years of unresolved issues and ingrained emotional distance regrettably lingered. While Johnny's grief was undeniably authentic and palpable, his public expressions of regret or explicit acknowledgement of their strained bond remained remarkably subtle, almost implicit. There was no direct, explicit public apology for any perceived emotional neglect, nor a forthright admission of the specific difficulties they had consistently faced in their relationship. This reticence was, in large part, attributable to Johnny's deeply ingrained private nature, a man who famously abhorred public displays of emotion and personal confessions. Yet for those intimately familiar with the complexities of their relationship, and for Rick himself, had he lived, it subtly highlighted the enduring, painful silence that often shrouded their personal struggles. Thank you so much to everyone who watched to the end. Your likes and subscriptions are incredibly valuable. And be sure to hit the bell so you never miss new videos and stay updated.